What happens when Hollywood legend Harrison Ford sits down for what should be a routine interview and ends up in the most explosive confrontation in daytime television history? The answer will shock you, and by the end of this story, you'll understand why one of America's most beloved actors walked off a set for the first time in his 50-year career. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really happened behind the scenes. Your support keeps these stories coming, and trust me, you won't want to miss what unfolds next. Harrison Ford had agreed to appear on The View to promote his latest project, expecting the usual mix of light questions about his career and maybe some gentle ribbing about his age. At 79, Ford had done thousands of interviews, faced down aggressive journalists, and handled even the most difficult press situations with his trademark dry wit and unflappable demeanor. Nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold. The morning started normally enough. Ford arrived at the studio early, as was his habit, and spent time chatting with the crew. Those who worked with him that day described him as relaxed, professional, and genuinely excited to talk about his new film. He even joked with the makeup artist about how many years she'd been trying to make him look younger, a rare moment of levity from the notoriously private actor. Joy Behar, meanwhile, had been preparing for the interview with what witnesses described as unusual intensity. Multiple sources backstage reported that she spent the morning reviewing notes, making phone calls, and speaking in hushed tones with her research team. When asked about her preparation, she simply smiled and said she had some interesting questions planned. No one realized just how loaded that statement would prove to be. The show began with the usual opening banter between the hosts, but there was an electric tension in the air that even the live audience could feel. When Ford was introduced, he walked out to thunderous applause, flashing his famous crooked smile and giving a small wave. He settled into his chair with the easy confidence of someone who had done this dance countless times before. The first few minutes proceeded exactly as expected. Whoopi Goldberg asked about his latest role, and Ford responded with his characteristic blend of humor and professionalism. He talked about the physical demands of the part, joked about his stunt double getting more screen time than him, and even shared a funny story about working with the film's director. The audience was eating it up, and Ford seemed to be enjoying himself. But Joy Behar had been notably quiet during this opening segment, a departure from her usual animated participation. She sat with her hands folded, watching forward with an intensity that made several people in the audience uncomfortable. When Goldberg turned to her and asked if she had any questions, Behar's entire demeanor shifted. "Actually, I do have something I'd like to discuss," she said, her voice taking on a sharp edge that immediately changed the atmosphere in the studio. "Harrison, I think we need to talk about your political views and how they've evolved over the years." Ford's eyebrows raised slightly, but he maintained his composure. "I'm not sure what you mean, Joy. I'm here to talk about the film." "Oh, but I think your personal beliefs are very relevant," Behar pressed, leaning forward in her chair. "Especially considering some of the statements you've made recently about environmental issues and social justice. Don't you think celebrities have a responsibility to use their platform for political activism?" The question itself wasn't particularly controversial, but the way Behar delivered it with a slight smirk and obvious anticipation made it clear this was just the opening salvo. Ford, recognizing the shift in tone, straightened in his chair and gave her a measured look. "I believe everyone has the right to their opinions," he said carefully. "I try to keep my personal beliefs separate from my work, but I'm certainly not going to apologize for caring about the environment or social issues." "That's interesting," Behar said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Because I've been doing some research, and it seems like your actions don't always match your words. Tell me, Harrison, how do you reconcile your environmental activism with your love of flying private jets?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Ford's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained steady. "I think that's a bit of an oversimplification, Joy. Environmental issues are complex, and I do my best to be responsible while also living my life." "Responsible?" Behar laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You've taken more private flights in the past year than most people take commercial flights in a lifetime. Don't you think that's a bit hypocritical for someone who lectures others about carbon emissions?" The other hosts exchanged uncomfortable glances. This was clearly not the direction they had expected the interview to take, and the audience began to murmur with unease. Ford, however, remained calm, though those who knew him well could see the storm brewing behind his eyes. "I don't lecture anyone, Joy," he said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "I express my concerns about issues I care about. As for my personal choices, I think that's exactly what they are. Personal." "Personal." Behar's voice rose slightly. "When you're a public figure worth hundreds of millions of dollars, nothing is personal. You have influence, Harrison. You have a platform. And when you use that platform to advocate for environmental policies while living like environmental rules don't apply to you, That's not personal. That's hypocrisy. Ford's hands gripped the arms of his chair, and for the first time, his famous composure began to crack. I think you're being incredibly unfair, Joy. You don't know anything about my personal life or the choices I make behind closed doors. Oh, but I do, Behar said with a triumphant smile. I know about the multiple homes, the extensive collection of vintage cars, the private jet trips for personal vacations. I know about the carbon footprint that's bigger than entire towns. And I know about the foundation you supposedly run to offset your environmental impact, which, by the way, seems to spend more money on administrative costs than actual environmental projects. The accusation hit Ford like a physical blow. His face flushed red, and his voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You need to be very careful about what you're saying, Joy. You're making accusations without facts, and you're attacking my character based on tabloid speculation. Tabloid speculation? Behar pulled out a folder and began flipping through papers. These are public records, Harrison. Your foundation's tax filings are public information. Your flight logs are documented. Your real estate holdings are a matter of public record. I'm not speculating about anything. The tension in the studio was now palpable. The audience had gone completely silent, and even the camera operators seemed frozen in place. Ford's breathing had become noticeably heavier, and the famous Harrison Ford temper, which he had kept under control for decades of public appearances, was beginning to surface. What exactly are you trying to accomplish here, Joy? He asked, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Are you trying to embarrass me? Are you trying to create some kind of gotcha moment for your show? Because if that's your goal, congratulations. You've succeeded in making this incredibly uncomfortable for everyone involved. Behar's smile widened. I'm trying to have an honest conversation about accountability. You can't have it both ways, Harrison. You can't be the environmental crusader when it's convenient, and ignore your own massive carbon footprint when it's not. And you can't sit there and pretend to be some kind of moral authority. Ford shot back, his voice rising for the first time. You want to talk about accountability? Let's talk about the accountability of journalists who ambush guests with gotcha questions instead of having honest conversations. The confrontation was escalating rapidly, and the other hosts were clearly struggling with how to intervene. Goldberg tried to jump in with a question about Ford's upcoming projects, but both Ford and Behar ignored her completely, locked in their increasingly heated exchange. I'm not ambushing anyone, Behar said, her voice taking on a defensive tone. I'm asking legitimate questions about legitimate issues. If you can't handle being questioned about your beliefs and actions, maybe you shouldn't be advocating for political causes. Ford's eyes flashed with anger. Don't you dare tell me what I should or shouldn't advocate for. I've been fighting for environmental causes longer than you've been on television. I've put my money where my mouth is. I've supported legislation, and I've tried to make a difference in the world. What have you done besides sit behind this desk and tear down people who are actually trying to help? The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Behar's face went pale, then flushed red with indignation. The audience gasped audibly, and even the production crew seemed stunned by the direct attack. Excuse me. Behar's voice was now shaking with anger. What have I done? I've been holding public figures accountable for their actions. I've been asking the hard questions that need to be asked. I've been doing my job as a journalist. Journalist? Ford's laugh was bitter and sharp. Is that what you call this? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're more interested in creating drama than informing your audience. You came into this interview with an agenda, and you've been trying to execute it from the moment I sat down. The accusation clearly stung Behar, and her mask of professional composure finally slipped completely. How dare you question my integrity, she snapped. I've been doing this for 30 years. I don't need some pampered Hollywood actor telling me how to do my job. And I don't need some daytime television host lecturing me about my personal life, Ford fired back. You want to talk about my environmental record? Fine, let's talk about it. But let's also talk about the fact that you've clearly done everything possible to make this as confrontational as possible, instead of having a real conversation. The battle lines were now clearly drawn, and it was obvious that this interview had devolved into something far beyond what anyone had anticipated. The question that remained was how far each participant was willing to push before someone finally backed down or walked away. Based on the fire in both their eyes, neither seemed prepared to surrender anytime soon. The studio atmosphere had become electric with tension as Ford and Behar faced off across the coffee table. What started as a routine promotional interview had transformed into a full-scale confrontation that no one saw coming. You know what, Joy? Ford said, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper that anyone who had worked with him on film sets knew meant trouble. I think I see what's really happening here. This isn't about environmental issues or accountability. This is about ratings. Behar's eyes flashed with indignation. How dare you suggest that I would manufacture controversy for ratings? I take my responsibilities as a journalist very seriously. Do you? Ford challenged, leaning forward in his chair. Because it seems to me like you've turned this into a trial, where I'm the defendant and you're the prosecutor. When exactly did The View become a courtroom? The other hosts were exchanging increasingly desperate looks, clearly wanting to intervene, but unsure how to diffuse the situation. The audience sat in stunned silence, watching two entertainment industry veterans tear into each other with a ferocity that was both fascinating and deeply uncomfortable. I'm asking you legitimate questions about your public statements and actions, Behar insisted, her voice rising. If you can't handle being questioned about your beliefs, maybe you shouldn't be making public statements about political issues. And if you can't handle interviewing guests without turning it into an interrogation, maybe you shouldn't be hosting a talk show, Ford shot back immediately. You want to know about my environmental work? Here's what you didn't mention in your little research project. My foundation has planted over 2 million trees. We've funded renewable energy projects in 12 countries. We've provided clean water systems to 30 communities that didn't have access before. Behar waved her hand dismissively. Anyone can throw money at problems, Harrison. That doesn't absolve you of the contradiction in your lifestyle. Contradiction. Ford's voice was now clearly angry. The contradiction is sitting right here at this table. You make a living tearing down people who are trying to make a difference, while you sit in your ivory tower contributing nothing but criticism. I contribute plenty, Behar snapped. I hold people accountable. I ask the questions that need to be asked. I don't let celebrities hide behind their publicity machines. No, you ambush them with gotcha questions designed to make them look bad, Ford countered. There's a difference between accountability and attack journalism, Joy. What you're doing right now is the latter. The confrontation was spiraling beyond anyone's control. Production assistants in the wings were frantically trying to get the attention of the show's producers, while the other hosts sat frozen, unsure whether to try to intervene or let the drama play out. Attack journalism? Behar's voice reached a new octave. I'm doing my job. I'm asking hard questions about important issues. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't be in the public eye. And if you can't conduct an interview without turning it into a hit piece, maybe you shouldn't be in journalism, Ford replied, his composure finally cracking completely. You want to know what I really think? I think you're more interested in creating controversy than having meaningful conversations about the issues you claim to care about. That's rich, coming from someone who flies around in private jets while lecturing others about climate change, Behar shot back. At least I'm consistent in my beliefs and actions. Ford stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, with a sound that echoed through the now silent studio. Consistent? You want to talk about consistency? You've spent the last 20 minutes attacking me personally, while hiding behind the pretense of environmental concern. You don't care about the environment, Joy. You care about creating a moment that will go viral. Sit down, Harrison, Behar commanded, her voice taking on an authoritative tone that only seemed to inflame Ford further. Don't you dare tell me what to do, Ford replied, his voice now carrying the full weight of his anger. You've been trying to humiliate me since I walked out here, and I'm done playing along with your little game. Game. Behar stood up as well, matching Ford's aggressive posture. This isn't a game. This is about holding powerful people accountable for their actions and their words. No, this is about you trying to make yourself look important by tearing down someone who actually tries to make a difference, Ford said, his voice cutting through the studio like a blade. You want to know what's really hypocritical? A talk show host who makes millions of dollars a year lecturing others about privilege and responsibility. The accusation hit Behar like a physical blow. Her face went white, then flushed red with rage. You don't know anything about me or what I've contributed to society. And you don't know anything about me beyond what you've read in tabloids and tax documents, Ford fired back. But the difference is, I'm not pretending to be something I'm not. I'm an actor who cares about certain issues and tries to help when I can. You're a television personality who's pretending to be a serious journalist. I am a serious journalist, Behar shouted, her professional composure completely abandoned. I've been doing this for 3 decades. I don't need some Hollywood pretty boy telling me about journalism. Hollywood pretty boy. Ford's laugh was sharp and bitter. There it is, the real joy. When you can't win an argument on substance, you resort to personal attacks and condescension. The other hosts finally attempted to intervene, with Goldberg trying to restore order. Let's all just take a breath here, and maybe redirect this conversation. But both Ford and Behar ignored her completely, locked in their battle of wills. The audience watched in fascination and horror as 2 entertainment industry veterans destroyed each other on live television. You know what your problem is, Harrison? Behar said, her voice dripping with venom. You can't handle being questioned by a woman who won't be charmed by your movie star persona. You're used to softball interviews where everyone treats you like Hollywood royalty. And you know what your problem is, Joy? Ford replied, his voice equally venomous. You can't handle the fact that some people actually try to make a difference in the world, instead of just sitting behind a desk criticizing others. You've built your entire career on negativity and confrontation. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Both participants were breathing heavily, their faces flushed with anger, their professional masks completely stripped away. The studio had become a battleground, and neither combatant showed any sign of backing down. "I've built my career on truth and accountability," Behar said, her voice shaking with rage. "Something you clearly can't handle." "I can handle truth just fine," Ford replied, his voice dangerously quiet. "What I can't handle is dishonesty disguised as journalism. What I can't handle is someone who attacks people personally while pretending to care about issues." The confrontation had reached a breaking point. The tension in the studio was so thick it was almost suffocating, and everyone present knew that something had to give. The question was whether either participant would back down, or if this would escalate to a point of no return. Based on the fire in both their eyes, the latter seemed increasingly likely. The studio had become a powder keg, and everyone could feel that the explosion was imminent. Ford and Behar stood facing each other across the coffee table, both breathing heavily, their professional facades completely shattered. "You want to know what really bothers me about people like you, Joy?" Ford said, his voice carrying a deadly calm that was somehow more menacing than his earlier anger. "You sit in judgment of others while contributing nothing positive to the world. You tear people down and call it journalism. People like me?" Behar's voice cracked with indignation. "What exactly do you mean by that?" "I mean people who have made careers out of negativity," Ford replied, his words precise and cutting. "People who hide behind the pretense of asking hard questions, while really just trying to create drama for entertainment value." Behar's face contorted with rage. "You arrogant, pompous, hypocritical piece of Hollywood trash. You think your money and your movies make you better than everyone else." The personal attack crossed a line that even the heated exchange hadn't approached before. The audience gasped audibly, and the other hosts sat in stunned silence. Ford's face went completely still, a dangerous calm settling over his features. "What did you just call me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You heard me," Behar shot back, seemingly oblivious to the line she had just crossed. "You're nothing but an overpaid actor who thinks his opinion matters more than anyone else's. You're a hypocrite who lectures others about responsibility while living like rules don't apply to you." Ford stared at her for a long moment, his jaw working silently. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold as ice. "You know what, Joy? You're absolutely right about one thing. I am overpaid. I make more money than I probably deserve for pretending to be other people on screen. But at least I know what I am." "What's that supposed to mean?" Behar demanded. "It means I'm honest about what I do," Ford replied. "I don't pretend to be a serious journalist when I'm really just an entertainer. I don't hide behind noble causes when I'm really just trying to create controversy. I don't attack people personally and call it professional journalism." "How dare you question my professionalism?" Behar snarled. "I've been holding people accountable long before you started caring about anything besides your box office numbers." "Holding people accountable?" Ford's laugh was bitter and sharp. "Is that what you call this ambush? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're more interested in humiliating me than having any kind of meaningful conversation about environmental issues. Maybe if you actually lived by the principles you claim to believe in, we could have a meaningful conversation," Behar shot back. "But instead, we're stuck discussing your hypocrisy." "My hypocrisy?" Ford's voice rose again. "You want to talk about hypocrisy? You make millions of dollars a year working for a network. That's owned by a massive corporation, with its own environmental issues, and you have the audacity to lecture me about carbon footprints. That's completely different," Behar protested. "Is it?" Ford challenged. "You work for a company that profits from advertising by corporations that pollute the environment, and you take their money, while pretending to be an environmental advocate. How is that different from what you're accusing me of?" The accusation clearly stung Behar, and her response was immediate and vicious. "At least I don't fly around in private jets while telling other people to drive electric cars. At least I don't own multiple mansions while lecturing others about consumption. And at least I don't attack people personally while hiding behind the pretense of journalism," Ford fired back. "You've spent this entire interview trying to tear me down, instead of having any kind of constructive conversation about the issues you claim to care about. I'm trying to expose your hypocrisy," Behar insisted, her voice reaching a fever pitch. "No, you're trying to create a viral moment," Ford said, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper again. "You're trying to get your clip on social media and boost your ratings by humiliating a guest. That's not journalism, Joy. That's exploitation." "Exploitation?" Behar's voice cracked with indignation. "You came on this show to promote your movie. You're using our platform to make money, and you're upset because I'm asking you hard questions instead of giving you a free commercial. I'm upset. Because you lied to me, Ford said, his voice now carrying the full weight of his anger and disappointment. You invited me here under false pretenses. You told my publicist this would be a standard promotional interview, and instead you've turned it into a trial, where I'm the defendant and you're the prosecutor. I didn't lie to anyone, Behar protested. I told you we wanted to talk about current events and issues you care about. You told me you wanted to have a conversation, Ford corrected. What you actually wanted was to ambush me with gotcha questions and personal attacks. There's a difference between asking hard questions and what you've done here today. The confrontation had reached its absolute peak. Both participants were red-faced and breathing heavily, their voices strained from the heated exchange. The other host sat helplessly watching the destruction of what should have been a routine interview. You know what, Joy? Ford said, his voice suddenly calm in a way that was somehow more ominous than his anger. You've made your point. You've shown everyone exactly what kind of person you are and what kind of show this really is. What kind of show is this? Behar demanded. The kind that cares more about creating controversy than having meaningful conversations. Ford replied. The kind that invites guests on under false pretenses and then attacks them for entertainment value. The kind that I should have known better than to appear on. With that, Ford reached down and unclipped his microphone, the small action somehow carrying enormous weight in the charged atmosphere of the studio. The audience held its collective breath as he carefully placed the microphone on the coffee table. What are you doing? Behar asked, her voice suddenly uncertain. I'm leaving, Ford said. Simply, I'm not going to sit here and be personally attacked by someone who thinks journalism means tearing people down for entertainment. You can't just leave, Behar protested, her voice rising with panic. Watch me, Ford replied, his voice carrying a finality that made everyone in the studio realize this was really happening. I've done thousands of interviews in my career, and I've never walked out on one, but I've also never been personally attacked like this by someone who's supposed to be a professional journalist. He turned to face the other hosts, his demeanor suddenly returning to something approaching his usual professionalism. Ladies, I apologize for the disruption. This isn't how I wanted this to go, but I won't sit here and be personally attacked. Harrison, please, Goldberg tried to intervene. Let's all just take a breath and try to reset this conversation. But Ford was already moving toward the exit, his decision clearly final. I'm sorry, Whoopi, but there's no resetting this. Joy has made it clear that she's more interested in creating drama than having a conversation, and I'm not going to be part of that. You're being completely unprofessional, Behar shouted after him, her voice cracking with what sounded like desperation. You can't handle being questioned, so you're running away. Ford stopped and turned back to face her one last time. I can handle being questioned, Joy. What I can't handle is being personally attacked by someone who thinks that's the same thing. There's a difference between tough questions and what you've done here today. I was doing my job, Behar insisted, but her voice had lost much of its earlier fire. No, Ford said, quietly, his voice carrying across the silent studio. You were creating a spectacle, and I refused to be part of it. With that, he turned and walked off the set, leaving behind a studio full of stunned silence and one talk show host who had just learned that even Hollywood legends have their breaking point. The cameras continued rolling as Behar stood alone, her face a mixture of shock, anger, and what might have been the first glimmer of realization that she had pushed too far. The audience sat in stunned silence, having witnessed something unprecedented in daytime television history. For the first time in her career, Joy Behar was speechless, and Harrison Ford had just delivered the most powerful exit of his legendary career. There you have it, one of the most explosive confrontations in television history. What do you think really drove Joy Behar to attack Harrison Ford so aggressively? Was this really about environmental issues, or was there something else at play? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.